Hello, everyone. I can't see you, but I'm expecting you're all joining as we get started. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. It will be something different. Welcome to the webinar today, which is how to secure top talent in the new world of work, something that is on everybody's mind. Clearly, we're all in the midst of this thing we're tired of hearing about, talking about, called the Great Resignation. So we're all trying to really stay focused on our people and how do we keep them joined. How do we keep them engaged? And also, how do we find those folks outside our organization to get them to join us to fuel the growth that we're all still feeling? Many of us are. So again, thanks for joining. I'm Rob Dwartz. I'm one of the founding partners here at Become Unmistakable. And I'm joined by my partner, Jody. Jody, wave. Jody is a phenomenal resource and partner, and she runs all of our learning activities and programs. And so she's going to be spending a lot of time tag teaming with me today as we walk through this topic. Before we kind of press into the topic itself, give a little bit of an introduction for those who haven't joined us before. I know we have several folks on that have, so thanks for coming back. We are Become Unmistakable. We're a software and training firm, and our primary things that we do are UMAP. And you're going to see UMAP kind of smattered in and around our slides today. It's not a shameless sales pitch, we promise, but we do believe that it embodies everything that we do. And you're going to see it kind of come and go as we're talking through our philosophies. We also have a UManage program, which is a live virtual program that supports soft skills training for managers, and a deep dive program called Unmistakable Leader, where we take leaders through a 6-month journey to help them become more inspirational, motivational, influential leaders. And the one thing that binds all of these together in our business is brain science. And my partner Jody is going to dive a little bit into that. I'll touch a little bit on, but I'll give all credit to her because she is the source of all of our brain science knowledge. And she does a wonderful job with it. But it really does explain why a lot of what we do works. And it flows right into the practical applications. So with that, I'll get started with a shameless, beautiful picture of my son. We are in my family very much in love with musical theater, community theater particularly, and my kids have a passion for it. And so this is my son in the bright yellow playing the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland a few years ago. He's a little bigger than that now. And the reason I share this story is I'm absolutely amazed how community theater can bring together groups of people from so many different walks of life. So in this production itself, there were kids from 26 different schools. They came together, and in 8 weeks, they were able to put together an incredible performance, I guess 5 of the same performance, same show, in such a professional and produced way. It was amazing. And it's a really wonderful analogy for the teams that we're driving in our own organizations, because when I look back and I unpack how this production, particularly, and many others like it, come together, they bring all these people back, all together from diverse backgrounds, right? And they put them together and they focus very much on connecting them to each other, which is, I think, wonderful. They're having pizza parties, they're playing games that are not related to the production itself. So they're really connecting, them to each other. And then from auditions all the way through all of the very few rehearsals, their roles are incredibly well defined, and they're all aligned to the one big purpose that they have, which is to put on a great show. So they all have these amazing roles. And then they are over and over again coached from directors, choreographers, vocal coaches, on how they can become the best versions of themselves in each of their unique roles. And then it all comes together and they put on a phenomenal show. And I just love the way that feels and the way that resonates to what we do as organizations and what might be the ideal that we can really strive for, because these kids and this handful, 3 or 4 people that bring them all together, they pull it off, and they do it in such a beautiful way. So thank you for letting me share that little story, because that's what really we should be thinking about, right? How do we bind people and get them to create a great ensemble performance within our organizations? The problem is we've been pretty distracted over the past 18, maybe longer months now, concerning ourselves not with things like that production, but really distracted by where are we working, right? This has been a huge distraction for us. Work from home, work from work, a combination of the two, and all the complications that come with it, right? There are all kinds of controversies and things that we're dealing with around where we work. And what we really think we should be thinking about is not where we work, but why, and more importantly, or more directly, why we stay. And so that's what we're going to spend some time talking about today. And the way we feel, and it's based on our work in research and our work with clients, is that people stay because they feel connected to other people, not unlike our production. They feel aligned to a common purpose. Again, the production is a great analogy. And they feel like they have a path to their success. And that's a lot about coaching. And we're going to spend some time, in fact, Jody's going to spend some time talking about our coaching approach and why we believe so strongly in a continuous approach. So that's our program today. Jody's going to talk about the power of connection and kind of the how and the why. I'm going to spend a little time talking about the same for aligning organizations and teams. And then Jody's going to bring us home with coaching in a similar fashion. And with that, I'm going to pass it to my partner, Jody, and she's going to take you through connecting.
Thanks, Rob. So I want to start talking a little bit at a very high level of some of the brain science around connection. So all of us have our own internal radar system where we're constantly scanning our environments to determine if what we see, if what we hear, if what we feel, whether that feels safe, in which it feels rewarding to us and we tend to move towards it, or whether that feels threatening. And when it feels threatening, we tend to move away from it. But not only does it affect how we either head towards or away, but it also creates a chemical reaction in our brain. And if that feels threatening, if we are saying something doesn't feel right, or I feel a little insecure about this situation, it actually changes the chemicals in our brain to where we lose some of our cognitive ability. We lose our ability to be innovative. We lose some of our ability to problem solve or control our emotions. So what we really want to do is look at our workplaces and say, how can we tap into this? How can we make sure that the environments that we are creating creates a sense of psychological safety, and that we really tap into that reward center? Because when we're in a reward state, the opposite happens. We become more innovative. It's easier to control our emotions, and some of that drama comes out of the office space. We problem solve better. We are actually able to work at a higher cognitive level. So we follow quite often Neuro Leadership Institute, and the founder and president is David Rock. And several years ago, he came up with an acronym called SCARF. And that acronym kind of gives us some categories that we can look at when we're trying to find these reward centers or eliminate some of the sense of threat. So I'm going to walk you through it again at a real high level. So the first is S, and S stands for status. So our sense of importance in relationship to those around us. And that can be things like getting a promotion. It can be, which would be a reward side. A threat side could be something as simple as maybe you are presenting and suddenly somebody points out that something isn't quite right in some of the information you give. So that's all around that status idea. C is certainty. So our ability to predict what's going to happen next. Classic way to look at certainty and the threat reward is the whole idea of COVID, right? We stepped into this environment. We've never been through it before. We don't know what to expect. It's a huge threat to our sense of certainty. And because of that, often many of us are not working at our fullest capacity because we've got a little bit of that chemical change because our brain is in a little bit of that threat state. So status, certainty. A is autonomy. So our sense of control over things. I often think of the concept of micromanaging, right? That's a classic threat to our sense of autonomy. The reward side, on the opposite of that, would be if we have some boundaries that we know we can work within, or we are empowered to make different kinds of decisions. So that would be our sense of autonomy. R is for relatedness. And that's how we feel, how secure we feel interacting with others and being accepted by them, whether or not we feel connected to them, right? Whether we feel that we are part of an in-group or not part of an in-group, not included in something. That can be a reward or a threat to our sense of relatedness. And then the last one is fairness. So whether we feel there's a just and unbiased exchange, whether that's monetary, whether that's relational, anything where we suddenly feel like something just doesn't feel fair. So as organizations, we need to be looking at how do we monitor some of this within our organization? How can we put some intentionality behind working towards putting our people in more of a reward state as much as possible, and not putting processes in place that inherently tend to lead them into that threat environment. So to give you some examples, I'm going to share a couple stories. First of all, help me out just a second, Rob, I lost my place. Go ahead to the next screen. Thank you. So within our organization, when COVID came, we started to realize that one thing we might start losing is our sense of connectedness to others, right? That relationship piece. So we decided early on that we were going to have one meeting a week where we all got on a Zoom call together, and it was no business. It was purely a way, check in with each other, see how they're doing. Often we started creating some different activities and some games. Sometimes we even did tours of each other's houses. We brought our kids into the mix, or whoever was in our household, spouses working at the same time, and realized that during that time, we probably even became more connected than what we were before, because we had set aside this intentional time to really get to know each other and just check in on each other. So that connectedness, bringing that into your workplace relationships, actually increases that relatedness category in a positive way. We did that through those meetings. Our UMAP, as Rob alluded to earlier, has different categories in there that people can share what their favorites are, what they like to do, what some of their personal goals are. And the more we can find ways to connect with our people on a personal level, the higher that reward center in the brain is activated. So another story I'll share is early in our marriage, I've been married 36 years. We often talked about going skydiving. That was always on my bucket list, but different things with either I was pregnant or we had different family things going on, and it just wasn't going to happen. And it just got bumped out year after year. And then about 10 years ago, I went through a pretty dramatic health scare. And after going through that, I thought, okay, I need to set some goals and I need to set some time frames on it. So one of the first ones I said was, I'm going to go skydiving. And I set that goal. I had the opportunity to do it with my daughter. So the two of us went up together. Obviously, we were with, an instructor and that kind of thing. But I was able to go skydiving at age 50, which was a bucket list thing. And that feeling of finally accomplishing that goal was amazing. Thoroughly enjoyed it. My reward center was way high because I had accomplished something that I wanted to accomplish. So when we can do that, and when we can create opportunities in our workplace for our colleagues to have an opportunity to do their personal best on something or accomplish a goal that they have, whether that's a personal goal or a professional goal, again, we're increasing that reward center reaction, chemical reaction within our brains. So one more story I'd like to share, but I'm going to have Rob share this story.
Yeah, so when we were all in the midst that we all went through this together, right, of COVID, we found our business took a pause, like many did, which was concerning. And one of the things that we did was take a look around us. And now we're a little bit of an unfair case because we know Jody's work and we understand how this affects us. But we looked around and we found somebody that we really felt like was getting a raw deal through COVID. And so what you see in this picture is me doing a little event with actually someone who is cherished in one of our communities as a bartender. And we knew that he couldn't work. But he was somebody that had just connected with so many people in the community that we really didn't know him, but we reached out to him to say, hey, would you be willing to do an event with us? And so what we did, instead of doing your typical, which we did these two, your typical Zoom happy hours, which got really old really quick, we decided we would do a national event that we would feature Kenton, this is our favorite bartender here, making his famous Manhattan, which I will tell you is amazing. And I've shared or tried many around the country. And so we set up an event where he walked everybody through the making of his special Manhattan, and we had sent out the ingredients ahead of time. And we had a chance to really do something special for him. Excuse my eco-friendly office. Because we also found out that Kenton's wife was also in the hospitality industry, and she'd also lost her job. And so we were able to have an impact on him through a Venmo, virtual tip jar at the end of this event that made a meaningful impact on him. And so Jody can share what that means from a brain science standpoint, but it really provided a pretty serious dopamine dump for our team while doing some good, and we encouraged others to do the same.
So one way that the Reward Center for Fairness works is volunteering, right? When we see some inequity in the world and we know we can step into that and try to make a difference and level the playing field a little, it actually gives us a little chemical boost. And that Reward Center chemical is dopamine. So you might hear me talk about that, gives us a little dopamine dump, and we actually feel better and can increase our cognitive abilities through that. So I'm going to take you back, right? That first story, notice when all of a sudden I could not remember what was going to be on that screen. And we practiced this, and I've gone through it, and I've never forgotten it. But being in this environment, right? Bit of a threat going on. How am I going to perform? A little bit of a status threat, right? Or a little bit of a relatedness. Like, am I going to be able to connect with the people I'm talking to that I can't see? So my brain was actually hijacked a little bit. I had a little bit of a cortisol release, which gets released when you're in a threat stage. And suddenly I don't have access to my memories the way I normally would. So that was kind of a live example of the impact that that threat or reward state can make in your cognitive functioning. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Rob to kind of talk about the next element that we're going to share.
Thanks, Jode. So we're going to talk about the importance of aligning. Jody's focus on connecting with people is incredibly important because this is, something that binds people, right? Connection to people, and it binds them to your organization at the same time. The other thing, though, that it does is put you in the position where you can align more easily. Connect is the fun part, right? Align maybe sometimes feels like the less fun part, the more direct and accountable part. But it's incredibly important to align your team so that you can have very clear understanding of where you're going and very clear conversations around coaching and performance. And so, of course, we'd like to tell more stories. If you've joined us before, I've shared this story in the past, but from a completely different angle. This is an experience that I had in the banking industry several years ago, where I was a young executive and I found myself in a boardroom where we were all supposed to share what we thought needed to be done within the organization in our turns. And I took my turn as a very new person in this organization, asked a question: have we ever considered doing something like fill in the blank here to help make the business better? And the executives around the table looked something like this, and there was dead silence. There was about that much dead silence, actually. And the guy at the end of the table, the chairman, stood up, put his hands on the table kind of hard, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Are you out of your bleeping mind?" And so the interesting thing about that story isn't that a bank chairman, undressed another executive in the room. The interesting thing about the story is that there was this long pause from everybody else around the room. And so I knew in my role, which was the CEO, that I had a real challenge ahead of me. And the challenge that I had first was to rebuild the trust of those people. But that's not really the moral of this story around alignment. The moral is these people also had very little clarity in their roles and responsibilities. And I'm moving around here because they had a strategic plan that looked something like this, that had an audible thud. I don't know if you can hear that when you drop it on the table, and it was stuck in a drawer somewhere and really not revisited in any meaningful and tangible way in the roles of the executives around the table. So they had a tendency to kind of look to the boss at the end of the table and say, what do we do next? Instead of having the clarity to go forward and actually work independently with trust and autonomy, which made the company move at a very slow pace relative to what it really could or should. And so that was my challenge. How do we build trust, but also build clarity, and with clarity, be able to push decision-making into the business at a level where it's closer to the clients, closer to the processes that need to be improved and executed, so that we can, in fact, scale the business faster. And so that was really my plan and my burden, but it was a happy burden because they were great people and they responded incredibly. The reason they responded so incredibly is back to Jody's teaching on SCARF, is because clarity is the friend of autonomy. When you have very clear objectives and clearly defined roles, and you can connect your people to their performance and the organization's performance, you have an amazing connection to purpose and a way for you to push those expectations into the hands of those that really should be doing the work. And you'll see on the right here, these are some images from our UMAP that we have embedded this capability into the tool itself, because that's our belief. So we capture team objectives and individuals' responsibilities and their key results toward those objectives, and we keep them front and center all the time. And that gives leadership the confidence that they need, that there's clarity and there's something to inspect after a period of time. And it gives the people who are charged with executing on these plans the clarity that they need to do so with autonomy. And I tell you, that is a trigger for me. If in my life and career, whenever I have felt most shut down as an employee, it has been when I have been micromanaged. Jody made the comment that is the absolute classic threat to autonomy, is being micromanaged, and that crushes me. I love the autonomy. I love clear objectives, and so now we try to do that with our team, certainly, and then with the teams of our clients. And so it's about aligning on purpose, right? And this is just an image of our UMAP, and it all lives within UMAP so that people can see what they're really going after. And the way we do it, and in fact, well, we align individually as managers and employees around top responsibilities and key results, right? That's my job and how it's measured. So we get together even before someone walks in the door. It's part of our onboarding process. And we would suggest you do the same, where you sit down, hiring manager and the employee, and align around what the job's all about and how they're going to be measured. And they make sure that they come to an agreement, because that's going to be the basis for future conversations around development and performance. We also do this organizationally. And I would suggest if you want to jot this down and use this with your teams, we bring teams of people together to run a very simple exercise called +2 - 1. And so we take these top responsibilities, key results, and we throw them up on a screen. And one by one, the executive will come up with the team present, present these to their people and say, this is what my job is all about. Any questions, clarifying. And then we go through these 2 rounds of exercise, where the first one is everyone around the room is required to add 2 responsibilities to the list, something they don't see, something they don't maybe believe that they could also do in their role. And we collect all of those. And then the second round is we say, now do -1. You're required to remove one of their responsibilities. I know you might think they're all real, but you got to pick one. Okay. And that's the game. And what we find is that almost every time there are themes around additional responsibilities that the team has come up with, that is an eye opener to the executive, that maybe they should be thinking about it, or at least clarifying their roles. And then the -1, it's almost, I wouldn't say it's unanimous, but highly correlated around a single responsibility they would take away. And then we have a discussion about, okay, well, Does this make sense to change, add, subtract? And in our work, no less than 20% of these responsibilities get changed all the way up to the CEO level. And it's been a really interesting exercise. Sometimes there's some tough talk. It's great exercise in healthy conflict. So we love to run it. In fact, we have a big group we're running this exercise for in a few weeks, which we're excited to do. So alignment, super, super important around purpose, connecting people and purpose and doing so up front. The other thing that we really align around and would highly, highly recommend that you do the same is a path to the individual's success, right? Individuals have desires. We're there to help them get there. And the way we do that is through having our people author their own professional goals with some coaching, right? With managers having an ability to weigh in and coach them, and a development plan for how they're going to get there. We also do this before our people walk through the door because we know what their ambitions are and how they plan to get there, and we have a chance to align around that. Again, forming the basis of a really great coaching conversation that focuses on them, their desires, their aspirations with some of our coaching, and how do we help you get there. So the punchline here, and we put it just in big, bold words, because we universally feel this way at BU, is that we are waging war against the traditional performance review. Many people do it. We've lived on the annual review process for many, many years. We really believe, is for reasons that Jody will go more deeply into in our coaching section, which we're about to launch into, that there's a better way, and it's called continuous coaching. And you'll get better performance, you'll get more engagement, more support, and the feeling of a more human approach to your people, from your people. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Jody, and she's going to talk about coaching.
Great. Thanks, Rob. All right. So I want to take you back, and I want you to just think for a minute. Think of a time, maybe it was early in your career or maybe more recent, but a performance review that you had that was given to you, that you sat in, that comes to mind that maybe didn't go the greatest. Either you were very uncomfortable going into it, not knowing what to expect, or things came out in it that maybe you weren't expecting. It was a very difficult conversation. Perhaps you went into it thinking, all right, I've had 11 months of the last 12 months that I exceeded all of my goals, but that 1 month where I didn't quite make it, and that month happened to have just been recently, and I wonder how that's going to play into this discussion. Or maybe you had a situation where somebody in your family had a health crisis, and there was a couple months during that 1 year time where your brain might have not been totally engaged all the time because you were trying to balance what was happening in your personal life. Or maybe one of your kids were struggling, or a family member with some other types of situations that took some of your thought process. And you went through it and you felt like you tried very hard to compartmentalize it and that your work didn't suffer, but you know that might come up. Or maybe you did have a month where you wish you could do over. It wasn't good. You made some mistakes. And yet, once you got through it, now actually you are performing at a higher level than you were before. You learned from it. You came out with much higher production than what you had before. But yet it seems like every time you're having an interaction with your manager, that past event keeps resurfacing, and you're wondered, how that would play out in your annual review. And I want you to think about that because I want to kind of break that down with some things that happen during what we would call a traditional performance review. So for example, one thing is we have found, and there's research that shows that when a person hears the word feedback, so a lot of the performance reviews are geared on, let me give you some feedback. And we're going to talk about how we turn that around a little bit. But when someone hears the word feedback, they've actually done brain imaging studies. and your brain lights up the same as if you were in a dark alley and you suddenly heard footsteps behind you. So this sense of impending doom. So it's actually a trigger in the category of certainty, right? You don't know what's going to happen. It creates a negative connotation in your brain. And as I said before, when that happens, your ability to process and your ability to be understanding diminishes. So what do, right? You need to be able to get some of that information back when you're talking with people. So we try to set up ways that the team member is involved before that review even starts. In fact, we call it a coaching conversation because we're focusing more on going forward as opposed to going backwards. They know what their top responsibilities were and what their KPIs are, as Rob shared earlier, and they have a chance to write how they think they've done. And they fill out what we call a self-assessment. That way, when the manager sits down, they have the team members' perspective before they even start to put some of their content in, and they can approach it in a much more balanced way and be able to offer insights as opposed to feedback. So another thing that we like to look at is what the effect of is when you feel like you are working with a manager that is lacking empathy. That story I shared about maybe you had some things going on in your home life and yet maybe your manager knew about it, but it really didn't seem like they were stepping into that to see how they could help in that matter. Okay, that causes a reaction under that relatedness stance, right? It's a little bit of your threat to your relatedness. And we feel that there are ways that you can get around that. One is using the UMAP as we talk about, or any tool that helps create connection. Another thing is we actually ask our team members a question that what keeps you up at night? And this information, it's not public, it is shared just with the manager, but it's a venue where the team member can express some of their concerns and some of the things that they're struggling with, whether that's at home, whether that's at work, what is it that's keeping you up awake at night? And that can help with increasing empathy so that as a manager, you can speak into that a little and show compassion and concern. So the next thing I'd kind of like to explore a little bit is the fact that there's a statement that says, if you have a brain, you have a bias. Our brains are created to take our past experiences and apply them to the future, which works great for things like, let's say you have a hot stove, right? And as a young child, you go to touch it and you feel the heat or you burn your finger, your brain stores it and says, from now on, when I see that burner, I know not to touch it, right? I have a past experience and I believe burners are hot, which is great. But the problem is your brain doesn't distinguish between what is actual facts or what was just your perception, what happened in that situation. So in order to kind of share and help you get your head around this a little bit, maybe where some of your biases might be, we're going to do a little activity. So for this activity, I'm going to need you to grab a piece of paper and something to write with. And I'm going to show you a bunch of items. So you'll see on the screen, go ahead, advance the screen, Rob. You'll see all these items, right? So there's multiple colors, multiple items. And what I want you to do right now is just look at this and take note of everything, every item on the screen that is red. Because in a minute, I'm going to take the screen away and then I'm going to give you 20 seconds to write down what you can remember, what items you saw that were red. So just take a look, try to kind of make a mental accounting of what you see that's red. All right, so go ahead, I'll give you 20 seconds and start making a list, please. All right, stop. So what I would like you to do, if you'll please go in the chat and just put how many items, count up how many items you came up with, and I'll drop that in the chat. You have 7, 7, 8, 5, 4. All right, wonderful. All right, so let's go ahead and look at it. Rob, can you pull up the items? All right, so the correct answer was 10. All right, so some of you got pretty close, but there were actually 10 red items. All right, so Rob, go ahead and advance to the next screen. So now what I'd like you to do is make a list of all the blue items you saw. And I'm going to give you another 20 seconds. So go ahead. Just the blue items. All right. All right, go ahead and put your number. Thank you, Angela. Put your in the chat as to how many blue items you came up with. I got a 0, a 1, a 0, a 2. Wonderful. Thank you. All right, Rob, go ahead and put the picture up again. The fact of the matter is there was almost twice as many blue items. There was actually 19 blue items in the picture and only 10 of them that were red. So what we just had was a bias. Primed your brain to think about red items. When you do that, your brain actually says, okay, this is where I'm supposed to focus. I don't need to pay attention to anything else that's going on, but just really concentrate hard on where I want to focus. That is called a selection bias, because when that happens suddenly now, when we're asked to think about the same thing that we've seen before and pull out something different, it's like it's all gone. We cannot remember. We don't even remember seeing one of them often. Okay, so this happens in typical performance reviews, right? You have something happen, kind of that story I told you about. Maybe you had something that went really bad and you overcame it and you're doing much better now, but it just keeps seeming to resurface in the conversations you have with your manager. It's because as managers, if there's something that we see and it's not correct and we know we have to address it, especially if we don't address it in the moment, it holds some space back there in our brain. And our brain is constantly looking to confirm that opinion we have, that that's something they need to change and that's something we need to talk about. And suddenly that's all we're seeing. And we're missing all of the things that are happening that are not matching up with that. We become very biased in our opinion. So to overcome that, often we say it's really important to expand those situations, to ask other people, to talk with other people, try to get other perspectives. Another thing that can happen when we're looking at coaching conversations is what's called recency bias. And recency bias means if you're looking at a large span of time, your brain tends to only remember, or at least remember more vividly, what happened the most recently. So even though you might have had a whole year of great performance, because you had that 1 month that was fairly recent, it tends to overshadow and become bigger than what it actually was. So a solution around that is not doing a 1-year annual performance review, because you're setting yourself up to that. That's just too long for your brain to go back and make an objective assessment of everything that happened. And instead, when we talk about like I said, what we call coaching conversations, we say do it in a 3-month time period. At that time frame, you're not going to blow out of proportion the one thing that just seems to be surfacing so much, because you're looking at a shorter time. That's the relevancy for what you're talking about. So again, those biases are with us all the time. And we've come up with what we call how to have a safe coaching conversation to kind of overcome some of those biases. And we train on this, so it's much more intensive than what I'm going to share, but just a high level overview is, first of all, we say S is for set the stage. Do your work before you go into those conversations. Get others' opinions. Make sure you're thinking about where you're meeting and what what is happening in the environment of the person you're meeting with, that they might already be in a threatened stage. Because when you're in that threatened stage, anything you hear, you don't retain like you would if you were in a reward state. All right, so S, set the stage. A, add authentic connections. And that's why we feel it's so important to set those connections on the front end so that you have a relationship and some of those tough conversations become much easier because there's mutual respect and honor. F, foster two-way dialogue. One thing we often say is during a coaching conversation, you should be doing, as a manager, more listening than you do talking. You've already come to your opinion, right? You've written up what you think, how the discussion should go and what you're going to talk about. Now it's time to hear their perspective, to let them talk about it, to let them add their color to it, and to be open to thinking it might be a little bit different. I might not have all the facts correct. I'm going to be a little more curious. And then last, end with action. In fact, we almost always say, as a manager, you should be asking questions like, what am I doing to keep you from succeeding? Or what do you need from me that maybe you're not getting? And then make sure that you act upon that. And when you do these things, when you start to be more conscientious about how do I keep my team in a reward state, and how do I not do things that trigger them in those 5 areas: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness. They, as a team, they become more innovative. You have less office drama that you're fighting against. They're able to problem solve at a higher level, and they have a sense of belonging. They feel like they're part of a team, and that that there's a connection there that they don't want to let go of. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rob.
Thanks, Jen. So we spent a lot of time talking about the power of connection, connecting people to each other as a way to bind them to your organization, and really how it happens and why it really happens through brain science. We talked about the importance also of aligning, right? And how important it is to align upfront and regularly in order to be able to have those more difficult conversations, but also to continually deepen the relationship process when you enter this continuous coaching cycle that we're obviously very much approve of. But more than anything is when you repeat it, that's when the real power comes in, right? And a once a year annual cycle of performance may be necessary, but if you repeat something that's more frequent, even semi-annually, we do quarterly, some of our clients do monthly. That's where you really drive exceptional performance and true exceptional development of people that can take your business in places that you didn't even expect you could go. And that's where incredible organizational performance really does happen. And to drive that home a little bit, I want to share one more story. And this is actually one of our own, and I'm not sure if she's on or not, but she may be. So this is our Danielle and her beautiful family. And I want to share a little bit of her journey. She was, I think, teammate number 4 at BU, and she joined us from the teaching profession. So she spent 10 years in the classroom. She was a middle school science teacher and then moved into educational technology, which is really what drew her to us, because she was a perfect kind of a unicorn candidate for us to help us really build and explore the user experience for our software. And so she joined as an educator and started working side by side with us, which was great. And of course, we got immediately behind where she wanted to go and when from a professional standpoint and a personal standpoint. We also do that. And what's her development plan? So we just started this iteration after iteration of conversation, and really incredible things came out of it. She was quickly up to speed, great work ethic, but in her own words, I need more business experience. And so what that led us to do is to have one-on-one coaching sessions, certainly, but we also ultimately chose to embed her into a client's business. It's a manufacturing company with a sizable one, with a sizable HR department that had very real priorities to execute. And so she joined them on a weekly basis while staying, with us, to really gather more perspective from the client's perspective and understand business better. Sadly, that got interrupted by COVID, but it was a really important lesson for her and for us, and she brought great value back with her. And so then we went back, of course, and never broke stride on our quarterly conversations around professional goals and development as they evolved. And so it became, or Danielle let us know because she authored it, that her aspiration was really to become a partner at BU. And so we said, okay, great. How do we do that? And there were some books that we recommended that she devoured. And ultimately, we got her an outside coach to really help her understand what she needed to do to establish herself as a leader and work more intentionally toward it. And she got her opportunity because today, this is Danielle, and this is really just from a month or so ago. She now runs a strategic business unit for BU. She runs our student platform, student and teacher platform, which is a great fit for her. And she's well on her way to becoming a partner with us. But I can tell you that the way this comes about is, of course, an exceptional individual, which you need to add the right teammates with the right work ethic, the right drive. But it's also the process that really provides the platform, and that we would highly, highly encourage anyone listening and anybody to really iterate on a regular basis around development, because that is where the real magic happens. And we've talked about what this all means from a retention standpoint. We've stayed away from that word up to this point, but this is really what it's all about. When you create this iterative process of connect, align, and coach, you are going to put together what is a timeless, well-oiled retention strategy, which shameless plug for the advertising for this event. But it's true. When you focus on the success of your people and you find ways to develop them in this way, there's no greater form of engagement that you could possibly go through. And so this binds our people, it binds our clients' people, and we hope if you take this approach, it'll bind your people as well. So with that, I want to give a little bit of a shameless plug, just because we've received some affirmation in the marketplace of late. We've been spending a lot of time, finally, gratefully, in person at conferences once again. And our team was at HR Tech last month and learned a couple of really important things from prospective clients there and some of the keynote speakers. And one of the things that was very important was about letting your people do the driving. The advice that was given at HR Tech that we feel very good about is any tools that you try to put together in your organization that are around engagement and development of your people need to be embraced by your people. They really can't be top down. Those generally tend to fail. And there's a lot of tech out there that is very top down. So whatever it is, please make sure that you're collecting information from your people and acting on it, and then measuring engagement. And that is, in fact, what our tools do. Again, let your people do the driving. And then the other piece is, if you have the ability to gather insights, not just organizationally, that's really important. Gather themes about what's driving your people, how they need to be developed or trained in aggregate. We gather things like who has influence, and understand where the professional goals are within your organization for succession, and then boil down to the individual level. Because that's where, when you identify your top talent, you're going to get the information you need in order to really support them and have them grow within your organization, and you'll know. So that's, it's really difficult otherwise. And again, that's feedback that we've gotten from the outside. So I'll leave you with our community theater ensemble cast, and this is a curtain call from a different show. My son is in there somewhere. And the thing that I guess I really want to hammer home here is that when these people came together, and they continue to really connect as people, to align around purpose, and to be coached in the ways that I described earlier from various people, to make them each the best part of themselves. They finish these shows with so much emotion, joy and sadness, because they don't want to go away. They don't want it to end. And in fact, they make plans in their party after the final performance where they're going to come together in the next show or that show down the road. They're also bound to each other. The good news is that your businesses are not like community theater, in that your teams remain intact. So you have the ability, when you make this investment and you put together a process like we're describing, that really becomes a very virtuous cycle, to bind them together, and they won't go anywhere. So with that, I'm going to conclude our conversation, and I'm going to share one more thing with you, which is this QR code. If you're interested, Jody talked about the SAFE model, very, very high level. If you scan here, there's actually a card that digs a little bit deeper, and it's a resource we give to clients for their managers to kind of have in their hip pocket to help remind them how to approach these safe development and performance conversations. And there's a couple of other resources in there you can learn more about us. So that concludes our program. We'd love to hear from you if you have any questions. We've got a few minutes left. Chat is open, so please fire away. Thanks, Angela. This is, the pause, but we'll just give you a little bit of time. Well, we really appreciate everyone's time today. We hope you took away at least one nugget. If you'd like to connect with us, there are many ways that you can do that. And we'd love to hear from you, hear your feedback also on what we can talk about next and what we may improve on. But thank you to all, and we will sign off.
All right. Thanks.